Hello, everyone. So, we are going to talk about Zootopia in case you want to write about Zootopia for Essay 2. So, this is the 55th film in the Disney Animated Features canon, and it was released in 2016. It was directed by Byron Howard of Tangled and Encanto fame, and Rich Moore of Wreck-It Ralph and The Simpsons fame. So yes, Byron Howard, he directed Encanto after this, and Encanto, if you've seen it, you know is about kind of heavy topics like generational trauma and what have you. And this movie also is about the rather heavy topic of racism. And then we have Rich Moore, who is involved with some things that are rather irreverent, which I think also applies to this movie as well. So these two directors bring a lot to this movie in the fact that it's going to be dealing with things that a Disney movie might not typically deal with, which we'll talk about in more detail in a second. But anyway, Zootopia, as I'm sure you know, received universal acclaim from critics and audiences. It's getting a sequel this year in November, so that'll be fun. It apparently is also getting a Disney World attraction at Animal Kingdom this year as well. So, needless to say, it has been a wild, no pun intended, success. Let's explore why that is, because I think this film has a lot to say. There's a lot going on underneath the surface that helps it resonate. So we need to talk about the context, first of all. Like I said, it was released in 2016, and specifically, it was released in March of 2016. So if you can believe it, this was pre-Trump, which is crazy. That seems like forever ago. Even though this movie doesn't seem all that old. But anyway, I think that'll lead me to the socio-cultural context. So, 2016, Obama was still president in March 2016, and we were transitioning to the first Trump administration. Now, I think that's relevant because racial tensions in America, they still are pretty tense right now, but back then, they were just beginning to get rather tense. Of course, we had elected our first black president, but even then, things were not great. I don't know if y'all were aware, but Black Lives Matter began under the Obama administration in response to the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. So it's not like everything was a paradise, right? And then when we get to the first Trump administration, obviously that concluded with things like George Floyd, and there were incidents like Charlottesville, etc. So yeah, I think we definitely saw a turning point in race relations in 2016, at least according to some people's interpretations. And I think that'll be important to the message, because it definitely is a film that is talking about racism, which is kind of wild. Again, no pun intended, because it sits among all the other Disney animated movies, right? And sure, you have things like Pocahontas, which I suppose dealt with colonialism, at least a little bit. But on the whole, Disney doesn't really engage with the topic of racism in their animated movies too much. Even in Princess and the Frog, it was never, with our first black princess, it wasn't exactly explicitly addressed. So I think this movie is pretty unique in how it just dives into talking about a topic like racism. So let's see how it does it. It does it, of course, through its various symbols, and of course you need to write about at least one symbol in the paper. I picked out 4 that I thought were significant, and if you're in the online class, of course, you have to write on the discussion board about these symbols, so I won't go into detail with them because I want y'all to think about them independently. But the ones I picked out are the night howlers, or the night howler serum. I just sort of put those together. These are the flowers that make the predators act vicious. And then we have the carrot pin, which Judy uses to, at first, push against Nick before they are sort of reconciled by it. And then we have the jumbo pop, which you might think about how it ties to Nick's identity and character arc. We have the muzzle they put on little Nick when he was a wee fox, and how that, and you might consider how that shapes his trauma and his view of the world. And of course, the night howlers obviously represent fear in what they do to the predators, and how Bellwether manipulates society through artificial means with this drug. But anyway, I won't talk about them anymore because I want y'all to talk about them. So, and they'll probably come up some more in the course of our discussion in this video. So, that said, let's keep going. I did want to take some time to discuss the genre of the movie, because genre often is significant to what it's trying to convey rhetorically. Of course it's a Disney movie, but as we've hit upon already, it addresses quite the heavy topic for a Disney movie. So I think it's really subverting its genre. It's saying, hey, you're going into this Disney movie, which I think is a genre in and of itself. You're going into this Disney movie expecting probably some fairy tale fare. But I don't think this is a fairy tale. It's certainly fantastic with all the anthropomorphic animals living in their fantastic city. But it's not really a fairy tale. If anything, it's more like an Aesop's fable, like the tortoise and the hare, which is probably one of the most famous ones. Here we have the fox and the bunny, if you see what I'm saying. So it definitely subverts its genre as a Disney movie. It's not a fairy tale. It's dealing with heavy real-world issues, which we might not expect from a Disney movie. And if that weren't enough, unlike many, it mentions real life several times. That comes up several times in the movie. And it even alludes to Frozen. Bogo tells Judy, this is not a princess musical where you sing and all your wishes come true. This is real life, so let it go. Obvious reference to Frozen. So yes, it is definitely signaling to us that it is subverting its genre for its rhetorical purpose. And what on earth is its rhetorical purpose? Well, I think it's going to persuade us that racism is bad. How is it going to do this? Why, through allegory as a rhetorical device. If you didn't know, an allegory is an extended metaphor, so it's basically comparing two things, in this case, the predator and prey tension to racial tensions in the real world. And it's doing it for the whole movie, so it's definitely an extended metaphor or an allegory. So yeah, I think it's certainly an allegory for racism, racial discrimination, and stigmatization of racial minorities. The prey animals, like Clawhauser, even though he clearly could not hurt a fly, are stigmatized. They are said to be vicious, wild, savage, dangerous. I can't talk, guys, I'm sorry. Dangerous! Okay. And the prey animals, Bellwether says over 90% of Zootopia is prey animals, and they clearly represent the white majority. So yes, let's keep going. And if that weren't enough, I think the film really emphasizes its allegory by having references to specific aspects of racism in the real world, like stereotypes. Judy is called a dumb bunny, whereas Nick is called a sly fox, as if those stereotypes are what they are. But that's not necessarily true, right? And we have discrimination in the form of the scene at the Elephant Ice Cream Parlor, where the elephant says stuff like, "Isn't there a Fox ice cream place you can go to? And I know you probably can't read, but we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." So that is certainly discrimination, as also happened and still happens today in the real world. We also have references, I believe, to scientific racism. And this is the belief that this mostly occurred in the racism has always been a thing, but in the 19th century especially, during the British Empire and during colonial times, more broadly, there was this whole notion that if you are not white, you are some sort of savage, and your biology is the reason why. And people, really pushed this, and they were like, it's totally scientific, but it really was pseudo-scientific. There was no basis for it, and we see that clearly in the movie, where it's said that the predators become vicious because of something in their DNA, some biological component, where they're reverting to their atavistic states, or what have you. We also have one instance of what I think is a reference to racial slurs, because Bellwether calls the predators Preds when she thinks she has Judy and Nick cornered. That's not cool, Bellwether. So, yep, I think that definitely also is a reference to instances of real-world racism. Let's talk about Nick. Nick is quite the complex individual. He is a con artist. That's how we meet him. He buys the jumbo pop to melt it down into little pops that he sells for a higher price, which is not, and evades his taxes, which is not cool. But the reason he does such things, I believe, the film tells us, is because he is labeled as sly. I'm a sly fox. That's what I am. That is totally true. Even though it's just a stereotype, and he doesn't have to be that. He should be his own person, and he totally can be. But he doubts it because of how society oppresses him, because he says you can only be what you are to Judy at one point in his despair. But he learns who he truly is over the course of the movie, and he becomes quite the opposite of a con artist / criminal when he becomes a police officer himself. Alright. Ooh, it's Gazelle, which I think is a reference to Adele, who I don't think is a thing right now. But anyway, Gazelle talks about how she doesn't recognize Zootopia when the predators are othered or made into enemies, etc. And I think that just goes to show how celebrities in our culture, like Ariana Grande recently, comment upon the state of affairs in the country, socio-politically speaking. Gazelle thought that Zootopia was where anyone could be anything. She says she doesn't recognize it when the predators are stigmatized because it's no longer a utopia. And that leads me to the title. Zootopia. I think that title was chosen intentionally because it's a reference or a play. It's a play on the word utopia, which of course refers to an ideal society. So in other words, Zootopia should be a utopia, but it's not, and or at least it's not once the predators are othered. And actually, from the beginning, I don't think it was really a utopia. So, because there was a lot of prejudice in Zootopia, even before the predators are given the serum. So, yeah. It is not an ideal society, but it should be, or at least it should strive to be, as any city, country, society should strive to be. But it is not quite a utopia even from the very beginning of the movie, because there is some nuance to how the film depicts racism and prejudice, etc., because obviously the prey majority stigmatizes the predator minority, but the prey animals suffer too, if you notice. Judy, for example, is a bunny, and she is stereotyped as a dumb bunny, and just for her stature, her small stature, etc., she is assumed to be incapable. She is underestimated. She is given meter-maid duty at the beginning, etc., and she has to prove herself because stereotyping and prejudice get in her way, even though she's in the majority. So that's interesting. I think Bellwether is an example of that as well, because she is underestimated because she's a sheep, and she is sort of the lackey to the mayor, who is a lion, who is perceived to be more capable, etc., and Bellwether has this little closet as her office, and she is not treated well because of bias against her by her predator boss. So she ends up corrupted and bitter because of prejudice in Zootopia. And we also see, as an aside, I also thought it was interesting how Nick plays with her hair or her wool. And I wondered if that's like some sort of reference to white people wanting to play with black people's hair because it's different from their hair. So even though Bellwether is the antagonist, we still, I don't want to say sympathize with her, but we can see why she is the way she is, because she faces bias herself. She is stereotyped, she faces prejudice, it sets her back, etc. And that's ultimately what makes her the villain, because society corrupted her. So yeah, the point is, it isn't just the predators who suffer because of prejudice, it is the majority prey as well. Prejudice is a bad thing all around, the movie tells us. And the whole motto of Zootopia, or what Zootopia should be, the characters say, is anyone can be anything there. And that should mean the sheep can be the mayor, or the bunny can be the police officer, but apparently not. So it's bad also when the predators are have prejudice against the prey. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. So, I think the film is still very relevant today, even though it is, almost 10 years later? Because, of course, we still have racial injustice. I mean, it never really will go away fully, but we will always be facing it, and this movie teaches us just how bad It is for everyone, the minority and the majority included. Then there's Zootopia 2, which is coming out in November. And apparently, unless I'm wildly no pun intended, unless I'm wildly misinterpreting the trailer, it's about reptiles, and they seem to represent immigrant communities, and all the animals in Zootopia apparently were mammals, I guess, and reptiles are seen as bad or what have you, and I think that's very relevant to today if they do represent immigrant communities, because we have some anti-immigrant sentiment in the country today, obviously. And yeah, in short, this movie is quite relevant to our current socio-political landscape, and the human condition in general, and even though it's about animals. And it's also not surprising that the franchise is expanding with a new movie and a new attraction at Disney World, because it resonates with what it tells us about society, about ourselves, and how there's this struggle for us all to overcome our differences, appreciate each other's differences, and get along. Mic drop. Alright, I think I talked your ear off enough, but that is Zootopia. So thank you guys for listening. If you are in the online class, of course, you have the usual questions after this, but if you are in the in-person class and are just watching this because you didn't want to do weapons, you don't have to answer the questions, but if you're in the online class, you do. Alright, thank you guys so much, and I will see y'all next time.
Please comment the answers to or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. Zootopia subverts its genre as a Disney movie by referencing another Disney movie and contrasting it with real life. What is the Disney movie it references? 2. What is the name for an extended metaphor that is used for a rhetorical purpose? 3. Zootopia makes several allusions to real-world racism. What is a specific example of this in the film?